And joining me in studio to unpack further details on the press briefing held by the outgoing Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan and his deputy is Anand 7's resident political analyst, Mr. Sfiso Mahlangu. Mr. Mahlangu, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon here on Express Lunch. While the outgoing minister now hasn't wasted any time with regards to, speaking to the media and showing his reaction with regards to the entire cabinet reshuffle. Just talk us through your highlights of the press briefing held this afternoon.
Good afternoon, Matapelo, and good afternoon to all the viewers who watch ANN7 all around the world and those who stream. We have been overloaded and overwhelmed with a lot of commentary. I think even people who had not been watching and those who have taken precedence to the speakings of people like Mr. Pravin Gordhan against ANN7 have tuned in. And they've even tuned in right now as we speak. Even before I get into the answers of this afternoon, Mr. Pravin Gordhan has once again heeded the call to say if we need him for an interview. Of course, I had written to him and asked him to come and sit down on my show Straight Talk and speak his mind and that of Treasury. I don't think anyone has demanded or even asked the minister or the former minister to have a declaratory order. We never asked him to not speak to us. We have never barred him. He's always been welcome to our studios. He's always been welcome to our shows. I personally have invited him to sit down with me in my show. I've even expressed that I will go to his office or his home and we can sit down and I can get the answers that I want. It could even be a live interview to which he would have carte blanche to express his mind. This mind has, however, been expressed in public, in a press conference, to which he thought he was annihilating a young lady who is an ANN7 reporter. I don't think South Africa really expected that of Mr. Gordhan in any case, but to suggest that this reporter makes up fabricated information about him is unfair. The analysts he was responding to are us, who usually sit on the panel reading, taking into account the documents presented in Parliament. If someone in this country expresses and says Mr. Gordhan is a shareholder in the bank, I don't think that's defamatory, Matapelo, because that is true. He has even declared many of his assets and many of his shareholdings to the National Assembly and the House of Parliament. So we have been guided in everything that we have been saying.
Well, yeah, indeed. This entire media coverage and the narrative that Pravin Gordhan has portrayed with regards to how media, reports on certain critical issues. Now, with regards to ANN7, it seems as if the minister or the outgoing minister is painting some sort of picture that ANN7 has launched somewhat scathing attack on the minister personally. What do you make of this?
Well, the reality is, first of all, Mr. Gordhan is now Mr. Gordhan. He is the former Minister of Finance. The current Minister of Finance in South Africa is Mr. Melusi Manuel Kigaba. Though he still held the press conference under Treasury, he was, I believe, still allowed to do that because Mr. Kigaba has not taken office yet. He then took on ANN7 to say that people sensationalize or speak about him, often in those things that they speak are not true or have not been consulted for. Everything that has ever been spoken, particularly on Mr. Gordhan and his hands in Treasury, his manipulative tactics with regards to the bank, has been proven and it is provable. If he would come, as he has long been invited to speak in his personal capacity and defend himself. But I think what is an atrocity is that an old man would speak like that to a young lady and make believe in front of a room of a hired crowd to pretend that he is the one that is under attack. When he called the press statement, he called the press briefing, he invited members of the media, to which ANN7 was also invited, and then he asked, is ANN7 here? Let's give them a good opportunity to ask a question. he invited ANN7 to come and attend the press statement that he wanted ANN7 to cover. And so he wanted that coverage, and now he's pretending like some people want to bombard him with questions, and that is not true.
And now, Mr. Mahlangu, we also saw Pravin Gordhan stating that he got his political training in the SACP, which focuses on masses over individuals, further on stating that South Africa has a very rich history of mass and community mobilizing. What do you make of these statements? Did he actually open up a platform to incite some sort of declaration of war to that, stating that he's not going to back down without a fight?
Well, first of all, I've always known that Mr. Gordhan is a member of the ANC. He is a cabinet minister within the ANC government. He is also a member of the Communist Alliance. He has been that for a long time. He has served for many years within the ANC. I don't think many of us took Mr. Gordhan in personally. I had a problem because I wanted a leader, a South African leader, to represent me if I mandate them, and that person should have an inclination or make particular or specialize with the symbol of radical economic transformation. This leader I wanted to lead Treasury should be someone who wants to emancipate black people in this country and not be someone who represents the banking majority, not someone who overlooks issues of banking collusion, not someone who is quiet when students need funds, for instance, for fees must fall. You'll remember that in the past, President Jacob Zuma spoke to Minister Pravin Gordhan at the time and said, make sure that the money is there. Mr. Gordhan still did not respond to President Zuma until today on the issue of fees must fall. So everything that people have held against Mr. Gordhan is with the duties or responsibilities bestowed upon him as our finance minister. It has been nothing personal. And to personalize it and say this is the doings of the Gupta family or a particular news station in this country is not true. We've never mentioned his family, and I don't think that's important. Our familiarization with him was in his office and in his handling of Treasury and in his handling of the Department of Finance, because the Treasury in this country does not serve the black person. 23 years down the line into what we call a democratic South Africa, in a constitutional democracy, the deliverables are still very, very thin, and black people are, as they were, slightly better, but particularly not grown, they're not developed as they should be in 23 years of democracy.
Well, Sfiso, and for now we get back and carry on with our studio chat with our political analyst, Mr. Tshepo Kgadima, who is currently joining us in studio to unpack further details. Now, the media narrative is something that no one can turn a blind eye towards, and it has, you know, quickly come into the spotlight. Now, what do you make of the allegations made by Pravin Gordhan just now, singling out ANN7 in particular, stating of unclean records? What do you make of this?
Well, that is nothing but intimidation. An intimidation that he's not had the courage of his convictions to be able to take ANN7 head on. And most of the independent analysts that come here, such as myself, we raise issues, very substantive issues, that he has failed to address even of this morning during this press conference, which should never even have been at National Treasury. He failed to address those issues. So all I can say is this. It would appear that the job of selling ice cream has been given to Mr. Marius Fransman. So I think we now have to give former Minister Pravin Gordhan the job of selling furniture at Joshua Door.
Now, going back to the issue of mass mobilization by Pravin Gordhan, how do you foresee this moving on forward? A tug of war between Pravin Gordhan and also media companies. Do you foresee some sort of war between?
Oh, most certainly. But I think where we need to go now, because now we need to be looking forward, and there are difficulties ahead. Those difficulties need decisive leadership. They need leadership that can be able to discern the true situation at hand and be able to tackle those issues head on and have a plan, a clear plan that can be executable as the military would do. Because the road ahead is going to be a very difficult one. Already we are seeing the organizing that he's talking about. He's talking about organizing for revolt, that there should be a revolt against the state. There is nothing in law, howsoever, that he was able himself in this press conference to rely on on why he believes that there should be a revolt, on why he believes that there is a danger as to which laws are not going to be upheld. And he's cast aspersions by conjecture and innuendo on people who did not have a right of reply, who should have ordinarily been there to have a right of reply. It is completely unacceptable. So the question is that, will the president, who is in command by the virtue of his position, take charge? And by taking charge, will he then do the right things, as that is what is required of the president? Because failure to do so, this great republic, this great ship of state is going to be sunk, particularly by conduct such as the one we've just seen.
Now, Mr. Kgadima, we actually saw Pravin Gordhan dismissing the reports of the intelligence report, citing it as complete rubbish. Now, what do you make of the reasons that is cited so far for his sacking, naming the intelligence report in particular?
Well, there hasn't been anyone who has adduced a reason that he has been sacked for the intelligence report. First and foremost, we showed a piece of paper. We don't know the origin of that report, who is the author and who was it intended for. We have to bear in mind that in South Africa, there are only 3 agencies that can conduct intelligence: state security, crime intelligence, military intelligence. There is no provision for any other entity to conduct intelligence operations. So that report, first and foremost, we don't know, well, who does it come from? But ordinarily, if the president has been given intelligence, we have to bear in mind that, in fact, presidents, heads of state, get briefed on a daily basis by the intelligence agencies on what the state security situation is. And that is normal due course in every nation, everywhere else in the world. It is not an anomaly that President Zuma would have received intelligence, and if anything, we would be horrified if he wasn't receiving intelligence on a daily basis, because it is important for a head of state to be aware of the dangers that could be lurking in terms of the security of the state.
Now, just talk us through the current status of South African politics and the direction that we seem to be headed towards. As we have actually seen in Pravin Gordhan and Mcebisi Jonas, some sort of way painting a picture of a crisis, mentioning the weakening of financial institutions, of banks, and the weakening of the rand. What do you make of this? Are we headed towards a crisis? Because it will affect the ordinary South Africans on the roads, on the streets, on the ground. Are we headed to a crisis? And I think that South Africans do want to know the answer to that question.
The tragedy of the conduct such as the one we have just seen being displayed by both Mr. Gordhan and Mr. Mcebisi Jonas is bequeathing this nation with hardship beyond imagination. The question is that who will have the courage to stop this kind of conduct from continuing, as we see that they are not the only ones. We see that they have rented a crowd from the so-called Safe South Africa that themselves, they have not been able to demonstrate to this nation why the nation needs to rally behind their cause. Because if at the end of the day, their message resonated with this nation, they could fill up a stadium. They are battling to fill up a minibus taxi.
Now, with regards to the reactions of people popping out, raising their concerns with regards to the firing of Pravin Gordhan and Zwelinzima Vavi being present at the press briefing, what do you make of this?
Yeah, the question I'm asking is that, what do they know? They have not come up with substantive arguments to advance a particular cause on why Mr. Pravin Gordhan needed to be retained. We have asked questions that remain unanswered, and it is important for this nation now to once again be reminded of what are those questions. The questions are, Mr. Gordhan is telling us that he was going overseas to promote investment. He has never produced a prospectus of what investment vehicles and what investment classes was he promoting. If he was going to go and borrow money for consumption or in terms of our budget, that certainly is a failed idea, and G20 told him that 2 weekends ago in Germany, that you do not go that route. We have spoken at length that deficit financing is a failed idea, was disproved and discredited 30 years ago. How can he still be in love with such an ideology that has been? He has not answered that. Save South Africa have not been able to answer that. We have a perennial trade deficit. Therefore, they have not answered as to what are the plans to ensure that we can get into a trade surplus situation, taking into account the opportunities of other economies that are growing, which we could be trading with. They have not dealt with the issue of why is our debt costs so much higher. We are paying so much more interest than comparable economies. They have not been able to give facts as to why they are correct in the interest payments that we are making, which we are not even able to afford. And it is an absurd thing to even hear grown-ups in the form of journalists who were in attendance there clapping hands and applauding such absurdities. You have somebody here who at the end of the day was on the verge of mortgaging the sovereignty of this nation into the hands of the money lenders. And yet they are applauding that he's doing a great job. There's a very basic fact. This year alone, we do not have enough money to service our interest payments. He himself confirmed he's going to be borrowing 149 billion rand. That is certainly an economy that cannot afford to it living outside of its means, and it doesn't have the plan to have created the means of borrowing to sustain lifestyle. And in this case, in terms of what we need to be carrying on in terms of a state budget, that is going to create hardship. In fact, if anything, he should be ashamed that he is mortgaging the sovereignty of this nation, which many people have paid with their lives. They not just spend time in jail or underground, but they've actually paid with their lives. They've died so that we can have freedom. It is for that reason that people like myself, we will continue to be eternally vigilant, because that is the price of freedom. And we challenge him once again. Let him follow the courage of his convictions. Let us debate these matters. If he believes that it is so egregious for him to appear at an ANN7 channel, there are other channels whereby we can be able to take him head on and deal with these issues. But the question that must be asked is that as we sit here, this very hour, I saw a report earlier that the banking counter on the JSE has already lost billions of rands. But that is to have been expected. And one has to say, you can't feel pity for the banks, because Mr. Gordhan is the architect of those losses that they are now enduring. And the shareholders and the directors of these banks, when he was busy drawing up this architectural plan that is bringing about their financial hardship, they stood idly by. If anything, he encouraged them even to do unlawful things, whereby we have contended that they've been engaged in collusive cartel conduct as oligopolistic cartels in the banking sector and financial services sector. They have never once come up to disprove our allegation with conduct and practice that can show that indeed they are for financial inclusion, they are for funding. The very same Mr. Gordhan, during his budget speech, he said 30% of the 500 billion rand procurement budget will be set aside for black-owned businesses. He failed to do the basic fundamental, that is of ensuring that there can be the banks that will then support that 150 billion rand procurement. And without the banking sector that can support it, it is absolutely impossible, because white businesses that benefit largely from the 500 billion rand, they are being supported by the banks. And yet he did not make similar plans for the black businesses that he said. So what he effectively did, he just gave a positive platitude from a rostrum without any tangible plan to back that up. We can write a lot of things, but we challenge him. But this type of conduct that he displayed today, it has to stop henceforth. He has to desist from it, because it is not helpful for this nation. We are facing difficulties that we need to all work together. Those that cannot be supportive in resolving these difficulties, they must not be destructive and engage in this type of conduct we've seen.
Now, with regards to communication within the African National Congress, you know, a lot of people have come out to state certain, statements such as we were not notified about the reshuffle, or Pravin Gordhan now earlier on stating that he only knew about his sacking as finance minister and that of Mcebisi Jonas as the deputy minister through media. What do you make of the communication? Is there a bridging gap that needs to be filled within the party?
Look, those are aggrieved. They need to invoke the relevant sections of both the Constitution of the Republic, of the Executive Manual of Cabinet, or of the Constitution of the ANC. Without invoking any of the provisions that they are relying on in law for that expectation, they simply are just really so losers that we should not take heed of anything that they are saying. But for those that are claiming that they are patriots and members of, they are patriots of this nation, regardless of what political persuasion they come from, they now have to realize that we've got difficulties. We all need to rally together to ensure there can only be one minister, there can only be one president in each portfolio. And there can only be one president. We need to back the president that is there now for the sake of our country and not for personal interest of hoping that come 2019, some people would have built enough political mileage in order to be elected by being destructive. If they believe that they can build political mileage by being supportive to the vision of this country of ensuring that opportunity lives for more people, you cannot have opportunity living for more people without radical socio-economic transformation. And I challenge anybody who can say radical socio-economic transformation is not our urgent need, for it is.
Well, Mr.